Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
This meeting of the Sioux Falls Charter Revision Commission will come to order. The first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from our meeting of Wednesday, October 6. I believe the commission members were provided with a copy of those minutes in advance of the meeting. Unless there are any issues, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Supported.
We have a motion by Commissioner Hayek, supported by Commissioner Zylstra, to approve the minutes of our meeting of October 6. All those in favor will please vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Sorry. Any opposed? Thank you. Moving to old business then, we will take up first item A, formal recommendation number 2 by Commissioner Ann Hayek. Council member being able to provide their resignation for a future date, enabling them to run for another office while they are a sitting city council member. Commissioner Hayek?
I would actually ask for a deferral on this. There really is, I'm trying to figure out a place to stick it in here, and I'm coming up pretty blind. There really is nothing within the charter that addresses a resignation. And my situation was to resign. You can resign, but can you resign at a certain date, or does it have to be effective immediately? And my situation was one to run for another office. And so I wanted ample time to be made known for other candidates, but then was not allowed to do that. And I don't know, I'm not sure how to put it in, and rather than waste the council's time at this point in time, I think I have to either spend a lot more time figuring something out or chalk it up to just experience.
All right. Further discussion or motion?
I move that we place this on the agenda for our next meeting.
Okay. It's been moved by Commissioner Zylstra, seconded by Commissioner Deckinga, to put 3A, formal recommendation number 2, on the agenda for our next commission meeting. Any discussion? All right. Seeing none, this will be a voice vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. So item 3A will go on the agenda for our meeting for December 8. Next, item 3B, formal recommendation number 3 by Scott Arisman, application for TIF, only to be accepted for projects to eliminate blight, build density in the core, and simultaneously provide affordable and workforce housing. Unless there is an objection from the commission, I would invite Mr. Arisman to come forward. Mr. Arisman, if you have any comments to make in favor, I would ask you if you would please provide us feedback. I attempted to, with all 3 of your proposals, look at the charter and find sections where they would reasonably be inserted, and then come up with some language that matched the language in your proposals as closely as I thought possible. So if you want to provide comments on whether you agree with the way these are presented in the attachments to the agenda, and then the floor is yours.
Okay, I did read what you wrote, and I guess I agree with the language that you put in there. Like I've said previously, the city can never be less. State law stands, but the city can be stricter with home rule charter than what state law is. State law changed a few years ago. I can't tell you when that changed, but it's been pretty recent that now they're calling anything that's economic development qualifying for a TIF. In my opinion, that is such a broad statement that pretty much means anything can be applied to TIF. I mean, it's those 2 words, it pretty much changed everything. And I know that this year they're looking at actually changing it even more, and they want to propose a 0% on the TIFs, which is, Even worse, so they pay no property taxes for 20 years instead of just a portion of the property taxes. Jack Colbeck has brought that up. He's in District 13. He brought it up on the city news channel, CityLink, with a show with Councilor Alex Jensen. It looks like they're going to push for this. They want to do 0% TIFs. But a couple of things that's been new in the news that I wanted to add to the TIFs and why I think it's important for us to be strict on this and apply to blight and especially housing and the economic development portion of this. The city brags every year about their building permits. There's been numerous stories in the media over the last couple of weeks that we're going to hit $1 billion in building permits. What I've always said is the city's doing very well in development. There's no reason to throw gas on that fire. There's no reason to give TIFs merely for economic development because we don't really need to. We do need to support affordable housing, something else that's been in the news a lot lately. On that same show that I referenced, the CityLink show, Jensen even mentioned, I couldn't believe a city councilor was saying this, but that if people want to come and work in Sioux Falls and they don't have a place to live, they're going to suggest that people move to Hartford or Del Rapids or but come to work in Sioux Falls. And I couldn't believe that a city councilor of Sioux Falls would actually be promoting people to live in another town. Housing is desperate. It is. It's the number one. The city talks about it all the time. We need to build density in our core. And I believe if we stick to the original rules that were TIFs, blight, and building housing, and doing it within the core of our city, we can still give out a lot of TIFs. We would help the housing situation, and we'd stop actually pouring gasoline on a fire with all this overdevelopment. We're having we have one major employer opening soon. I have no idea where those people are going to live. I said that the Amazon parking lot is going to be a campground, and it will. I guarantee it. And I don't understand why we continue to give TIFs to stuff that is only exasperating the problem, which is housing. And that's what TIFs should be given to. Now, I know previously Mr. Zylstra brought up the fact that maybe this should be an initiative. Well, he may be right. We could do it that way. But I think that's unfair that we have to collect that many signatures to do something that you can simply put on the ballot this spring and let people vote on it and make that decision. Like with all three of my things, I have no idea how the public's going to vote on them. I've done no polling. I've asked friends. Like I said, I had about 11 proposals, and talking to some of my friends in government and everything, it got whittled down to 3. They said, oh, you're never going to get anywhere with this one. This one's too restrictive, blah, blah, blah. So these are the 3 best that I felt are a fair question to ask voters and not something that's a complete blowout, like free tacos on Tuesday or something. You know what I mean? I think that the public looks at these and, it's whether they agree or disagree.
Okay. I think that what we'll do is allow anyone else in the public who wants to speak on this item come forward now. If there are questions, if it's okay with my fellow commissioners, we'll call Mr. Erisman back up or any of the other speakers to talk about, to answer questions. Mr. Eckhoff, welcome.
Yes, good afternoon. Jeff Eckhoff, I'm the Director of Planning and Development Services for the City of Sioux Falls. And the TIF, all the TIFs run through our office. So I've been asked to speak today in response to Mr. Erisman's proposal and just talk a bit about TIFs, how they're used in Sioux Falls, how they've been used, and how the process works a little bit. So Mr. Erisman is right. It was 2011. I believe the law did change at the state level to be more permissive. The language specifically talks about 50% of the property has to be used to stimulate the economy, basically, and the improvement of the area significantly enhances the value of all the land within that TIF district, and so that is correct. The other thing you need to understand, and there's the traditional definition of blight, which is dangerous, health hazards, the things you would think of, but also State Statute 1119 or 11911 also talks about open areas. And it says any area which is predominantly open and which because of obsolete platting, diversity of ownership, deterioration of structures, or site improvements or otherwise substantially impairs or arrests the sound growth of the municipality is a blighted area. And so across the state, they have used that definition to bring in farmland, outdated land, land that's been underdeveloped. And so the definition of blight is quite broad. I would tell you that the city, for most, you ask most municipalities, TIF is one of the few tools they have to spur development. It's been used for housing. It's been used obviously for commercial and industrial development across the state. We've used it primarily in the downtown area to help revitalize the core in that way. From an economic development standpoint, we've had some that have been done for housing in a blighted area. The Whittier Heights, which is up on North Cliff Avenue, is an example of a TIF project that was in a very blighted area that provided some moderate housing. But a lot of them have been used downtown, in all fairness to that. The city has initiated 25 TIFs. 13 of them are currently active. 5 did not happen for various reasons. The deal fell apart, that type of thing. And many of them included some aspect of blight. Williams Pipeline was an example. The uptown developments with all from the Pitts junkyard, all the contamination in the Falls Park area. The Whittier Heights, as I mentioned, some of the rail yards. A lot of those did have blight to them. Now, the use of that turned out to be a mixed use between residential and commercial, but nonetheless, it did alleviate blight. And of course, we had some that were very economic development focused forward, like the Lumber Exchange, the Hilton Garden Inn, in the Steel District. Now, I will tell you also, we also look at that from a workforce development standpoint. We understand we need workers. Those of you who have had young children that have moved away and they come back and they look at what's happening downtown, it is a tool for workforce recruitment and retention. They love what happens down there. It's an exciting part, and it signals to them that Sioux Falls is a vibrant place they want to live. So we do look at that as part of a workforce development. The process we go through, and I understand that there is a significant amount of public engagement and public hearings that we go through. We are required by law to do at least four public meetings, or 3 actually. We do 4, and we do as many as 6. So typically with the TIF, we'll come first with an informational meeting to the council, notice public, come and have the project come in, we'll talk about it. We do a planning commission briefing, which is noticed. We talk to the planning commission along with all the other regular things coming up on their agenda, because the planning commission has to create the district and approve the plan. Then we have the actual planning commission meeting the next day, or the next evening, pardon me, and that's a public meeting. From there, we typically then go to the county and the school district, and we offer to come to them for a public meeting. School district generally passes, but the county just about always has us come, as Commissioner Hayek will tell you, and we give a presentation at County Commission of what the project is, the numbers, the amount, and what the project is going to be. And then we come back to council for first reading. And the development agreement is an ordinance, so it's 2 readings, but we present the entire package because it doesn't make sense to do a piece. We talk about the creation of the district, we talk about the plan, we talk about the development agreement all in one package, but the only thing that's voted on at the first reading is the development agreement. We come back for a second reading, we do the second reading of the development agreement, we go through everything again, and then by state law, the plan and the district are through resolution. And so that's the 6th public process and public hearing that we have, with significant amounts of time in between each one of those meetings to allow for input and comment, which councilors do get. The last thing I want to talk about a little bit is the legislative summer study that went on housing this year. And there were 4 meetings across the state, 2 in Pierre, 1 in Rapid City, and 1 in Sioux Falls. And we attended all those sessions. We testified at the one in Sioux Falls and talked a lot and heard what people were doing across the state. So some of the things that are coming out of that I understand are being moved forward in this session are changes to the TIF legislation. There's some restrictiveness in the TIF legislation specific to affordable housing that allows more flexibility. There's also some constraints. You can't use TIF proceeds right now for construction of residential structures. We'd like to see that changed. This is all going to be aimed just at affordable housing. They're not changing the TIFs for industrial, commercial. It's all for an affordable housing. And with regards to the 0% TIF, first of all, there's a misperception the people don't pay property taxes under a TIF, and they do. The property taxes go into a fund to pay for the improvements, but they pay the full amount of property taxes. That's not abated, that's not reduced in any way. They pay the taxes that are there, and most of the time we'll make them give up the discretionary formula to make the TIF work, so they're not even getting the break of the traditional discretionary formula. The 0% TIF that Mr. Erisman was talking about, what Senator Colback was talking about was the state is looking at putting $100 million into a fund that can be used for TIFs for affordable housing, and then they would basically fund those TIFs. So let's just say Sioux Falls decided to do a TIF for $2 million to put in, 100 affordable homes in the development, put the infrastructure in. What they would do is make those funds available to us at 0% interest. So then we could do the TIFs with the developer for 0%, so that they could put that in for infrastructure, use their taxes to pay that money back. So that's the 0%. I was actually at the table in that particular taping when Senator Colback was talking, and I will admit he probably didn't explain it as well as he could, but that's the intent. So that's the zero. When you hear a 0% TIF, it's 0% interest to communities that they can then turn around and provide TIFs to developers and builders in their community. So with that, I'm open for other questions, but just again wanted to provide some background, insight, and be available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eckhoff. Further public input on this proposal, recommendation number 3, related to TIFs. Any further comments? All right, I would turn it over to our commissioners for purposes of questions of either Mr. Erisman or Mr. Eckhoff.
I would have a few. Scott, you're obviously wanting to stick this into the charter because you feel that it's been abused or misused. And can you, if I've asked a question you really don't care to answer, I don't want to put you on the spot, but is there some TIF that has really offended you or do you feel was out of line?
Oh, there's been several. Luxury apartments down at the end of Phillips to the Falls when the city held onto the land for him for 10 years, tax-free, and then gave him a TIF on top of it. Those apartments are not affordable housing. They're $1,500 to $2,500 a month. That is not affordable housing. 2 parking ramps after we just built one that failed. We don't need 2 more parking ramps. Parking ramps don't provide jobs, except for when they're built. They don't provide housing. Having nighttime parking for a Levitt concert is an economic development. So those 2 did offend me.
Okay.
Giving $90 million, I think it was $90 million to the Development Foundation and $30 million of it as a slush fund for marketing reasons. That is not a good way to use TIF money. And as for what Mr. Eckhoff said about, it is a tax rebate. There's no other way to look at it. They do pay it in. They get it all back to spend on their project.
Okay.
That's what a TIF is.
Well, no, because I do know that the downtown area was set off as a TIF. Boy, it was probably before you were born.
Right. And
And I'm serious on that.
Yeah.
And there were some questions, but to develop. So I won't belabor that question mark. So thank you. That's all I need.
Okay.
Thanks.
Does anybody else have a question?
Mr. Erisman, I did have one question, and that was when I was putting together the language, I did pull from the document that you had submitted. For purposes of this, if we were to put this on the ballot and it were to be passed by the voters, how would you define core of the city?
I said this the last time.
Okay. I'm sorry.
It's what it's called, and I found this somewhere, but the city would be able to tell you it's called proper. And from what I remember it being, unless it's expanded or detracted, we just had redistricting, it would be Russell Avenue, 41st Street, Cleveland, and Kiwanis. So that's your area. That's your proper. So that's a big area. And it's an area that could use a lot of redevelopment, especially with housing. And I do agree with Mr. Eckhoff on some of the changes that they're to make it easier for housing to be built with TIFs. Yes.
And then one more question, that is, so, and I, again, drafted it with the and instead of an or on the different requirements for the TIF. I just want to clarify that your proposal would be intended to prohibit any TIFs being granted except workforce or affordable housing located in the core of the city that eliminates blight. Is that the intent?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and like he explained the blight thing, and I understand that too. Blight is a big thing, you know. So I'm more concerned about the housing factor of it than the blight thing, because like he said, blight covers a lot of stuff.
Mr. Chair?
Commissioner Hayek, sorry.
I do have another question. As I'm looking at your proposal, it's not or, it is and in each case. So, and blight is defined how?
As he said, he actually said more than I actually knew. Empty lots, environmental cleanup, destruction. You have to tear a building down and put up a new structure.
But,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
so blight is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, blight is anything that you have to do over. Yeah.
Okay,
Something like
thank
that.
you.
Yeah.
While Mr. Arisman is at the microphone, any other questions for him? Commissioner Zylstra.
Thank you. Thank you for remembering your comment in response to my suggestion that perhaps this should better be an initiative. I'm not sure you understood the impact. My point was, does this really rise to the level of needing to go in the charter? Or should this just be an initiative that goes into city code or whatever? Because there's very broad powers of initiative. And so that was really my question. I know we have a tradition in the state, and we saw that even with, and not to start another different debate, but with the legalization of marijuana that was put into the state constitution so that the legislature couldn't change it. And I think if I remember hearing the proposer of that correctly, he said that was exactly why they did it there. There's all kinds of very specifics in there that usually go in law. And I have a concern about putting things into the charter that better should be in terms of laws, ordinances, codes of the city. And interestingly, this is probably one of your proposals that I would be most likely to support. I just am wondering whether it rises to the level of needing to be in the charter. And you don't need to respond to that, but I just wanted to clarify my thinking.
One comment about that. You brought up the marijuana initiative. It's getting very, very hard. You know, besides the fact that you have to organize and collect signatures, that's hard in itself. You know, some people think it's easy. It's not easy. I've been part of groups that have done that. What we're finding is, even if you go through all that effort and you get the signatures and they're valid, there's always there seems to be some legal wrangling by leadership that says, oh, this did follow this rule, so we're going to throw this out. There's a court challenge on the recreational marijuana. I don't believe it should have been. I didn't. One subject, do you support recreation? Yes. You know, so there's always this thing where we could go out and do the work and do an initiative, and then at the end of the day, they throw it out. Because they say, you didn't follow this one little minute rule or whatever, or somebody can challenge it. It can be very, very, very expensive. Or we can do the easy route. We can come here, have a couple of short meetings, discuss it, put it on the ballot, and let the voters decide. That's the easy route. Yeah.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Hayek.
Scott, thank you so much. I'm kind of interested in this, in that once we start putting items that are specifically addressed in state statute, and I thank Jeff for coming with his information, because I tried to pull everything together. My recent change I saw was 2018, so there, we have so many items in 9/11 that deal with, municipal governments and what we can't do. And I know, would you be better off going to the legislature and actually dealing with them as they look at the law as TIFs so that we kind of stay in the same path?
Not really, because they changed it.
Well, change it again,
They
is what I'm
changed
saying.
it to be, they changed it to open it up to anything, which I was strongly against. I didn't think they should have done that, but they did it. And, going to them would do no bit of good. They probably even make it even more open to more things.
okay.
The other thing that I want to point out, then, you bring this up, is that you're saying, well, the voters, let's say the voters approve this, and it's put on the ballot. The city council can come back. A new city council can come back in a couple of years and say, you know, Arisman's idea is not working. We really need to go back to giving TIFs to other groups. Or it is working, or it's having no effect. They can change it.
And
They
my
can change
question,
it.
my
Yeah.
question is really relating to whether
Right.
we would address something that is really specifically addressed within the state law, within the charter, because the avenues then become so wide that our charter would be yay so thick because we're addressing everything. So that was my question.
Yeah,
Thank
okay.
you.
Thank you, Mr. Arisman. Mr. Eckhoff, I just had two quick questions, and if you do not have this information off the top of your head, I understand. In talking to Mr. Arisman, I appreciated his answers to my question. I think it's pretty clear this would be a very narrow strike zone in what the city council could accept and approve by way of TIFs. Do you happen to know, even if it's a rough estimate, on the percentage of the TIFs in the last 10 years that were related to workforce or affordable housing?
I'm going to call on Dustin Powers, who's in our office. We were looking at that earlier. I could tell you probably more than half had a housing component to it, but the affordable piece is a little different.
And if you could please introduce yourself, sir.
Yeah, Dustin Powers with the Planning and Development Services Department. So we're looking back at the last 10 years. If we were to look back, and I mean, I guess we'd have to define what we're defining as affordability and workforce housing to really answer that question. But I would say of the last 10 years, probably 2 of them were of that category of housing. The Hidden Hills Apartments, which is the Whittier Heights project that Jeff referenced earlier. And then there was a TIF that was approved for the 3rd Avenue Lofts Apartments downtown, which had affordability components, but that also required market credits as well. That fell apart, so that project actually didn't occur as an affordable project, and the TIF actually didn't do anything. We didn't process or use the TIF for that project. So,
Of the 2 projects you've mentioned, were either of those in what Mr. Arisman defined as the core of the city?
they both would have been, yeah.
Okay. And then how many TIFs in the last 10 years total? Those 2 were out of how many total TIFs in the last 10? Just rough estimate, I'm sorry.
In the last 10 years, there would be 15 TIFs.
Okay.
And again, to Jeff's points, probably at least half of those had a component of housing to them. Many of them are in our downtown area. I guess another one of those that maybe could be classified as workforce housing, so maybe I misspoke, would be there was apartments that were on the Williams Pipeline site, which would have been our TIF 17, and those are, again, not necessarily affordable, but depending on the price point that we define as workforce housing could be acceptable. So that would have been another one that was specifically just a residential TIF.
Was that 3rd potential project also in the core of the city?
That would have been just south of 41st Street by Costco there. So that project would have been out of the core.
So the 2 projects that you've mentioned that would have qualified within the core of the city for workforce or affordable housing in the last 10 years, were, off the top of your head, do you know if either of those could have been qualified as eliminating blight?
I would say all 3 of those would have eliminated blight.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any further questions from the commission of any of the people who've come forward?
I would have a couple of Jeff, if I could. Thanks. Now, as you mentioned, these things, would you say that the hearings on these can be contested, heavily contested, or do they just kind of slip through fairly easily?
The ones I've been involved with have not been contested. I mean, Mr. Eastman has spoken against them, so yes, we've had
Okay.
opposing testimony, but most of them have not been highly contentious, nothing like an apartment rezone, for example.
Well, in the county, I know they have to come before the county and the school board, and sometimes they would get pretty
Right.
exciting.
We have had, I should back up, we did go up to this Tri-Valley School Board meeting.
Right.
For the one for Foundation Park, and had a meeting with those folks, and Bob Munt and I and Dustin and Mike went up for that one, and they had a lot of questions, but I think we were able to answer them.
If this were addressed, the TIF in the charter, how would that change how you operate?
Well, yeah, if this were to pass the way it is, we would not be able to, we'd have to take a look at what we did with the developments. I mean, a lot of our TIFs have been in the downtown area because it is so difficult and expensive and risky to develop downtown because of infill development's harder than a greenfield just from the construction standpoint. You've got rock, you've got contamination, you've got all these issues. And we believe that taking care of the downtown core and the investments that are made, yes, maybe those aren't immediately affordable, but for example, what's happening now is you've got Prescott Place apartments that are more in a workforce that's happening. We've got the project we're working on the First Avenue lot across from Ace Hardware. Wouldn't probably meet the affordable, it certainly is going to be more of a workforce housing type of a product. So as you get away from that, what this growth has done downtown is leveraged or sparked that other development that comes around it that kind of makes a well-rounded neighborhood, gives you some options in this downtown area where people want to live, but can maybe not, certainly can't afford the apartments Mr. Eastman was talking about, but a studio a few blocks down, that's something they can afford. And so that's the type of ripple effect or leverage that we see happening with those type of projects, and we'd hate to be able to lose that catalyst for that other development.
And so if you're saying that if you were confined to the core, how would that affect the city?
Well, first of all, I don't, as broad of an area as he gave, I don't have as big of a problem with that. Obviously, you're going to end up sometimes where it's on the edge, and it would have been nice to have done that. We certainly, I know with our workforce, with our housing plan that the mayor is looking at, we are certainly looking at infill development and taking care of the core. It's a more difficult lift to get developers involved. So a lot of our resources, we're going to be targeting at that core area, redevelopment, going into some of our core neighborhoods, and our next level of neighborhoods too that are just in the next circle out.
And at this point in time, is there a known definition? I know Scott gave the borders, as he said, but do you have one that you deal with that is the core?
Not formally. We have the downtown boundaries that we look at.
Right.
But when we look at the TIF project, we look at it on its face value, what it brings to the city, the value that we get. We've just seen most of them happen in downtown.
Well, the downtown TIF is the one I was referencing before that was
Yeah.
done eons ago.
Yeah.
But
That one, yes,
yeah.
the very first one.
The
way
very
back
first
when.
one, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
Yeah, we were actually, Dustin was doing research on this and had the notes weren't as complete back then, so we don't have as much information. I do remember, and I do remember hearing about it. Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eckhoff.
thank you.
I do want to make sure we keep things moving. I want to give full and fair consideration and discussion to Mr. Erisman's first proposal of 3, but I also am sensitive to the time limitations today. So further questions from the commission of any of the people? All right, in that case, I will close the public testimony portion and move to discussion or a motion by the members of the commission on this proposal number 3. Commissioner Zylstra.
I would first have an inquiry of the chair. I never like it when a motion just dies because nobody so would it be acceptable in your understanding of procedure to move that it be put on move the motion to approve, even though I might vote against it later?
For procedural purposes, under Robert's rules, what would have to happen to discuss a motion is there would have to be a second. If the motion fails for lack of a second, then there could not be discussion of the commission on that motion. But yes, if you move it, it is seconded, nothing prevents you from then voting against it later.
In that case, I would move the motion to move forward to the ballot the proposed wording for section 2.15 as presented on the agenda.
It's been moved by Commissioner Zylstra that recommendation number 3 be placed on the ballot for the municipal election in April. Is there a second? That motion dies for lack of a second. Further discussion and/or action? So the way that we handled this procedure 2 years ago, we do need to take, for the benefit of the public and out of respect for Mr. Arisman, definitive action on his recommendation. So there would need to be a motion to not put this on the ballot or to formally reject, I believe is how we said it 2 years ago, the recommendation. Okay. So in conferring with the city attorney's office, as long as the language of the motion is clear that we are rejecting, tabling, however you want to say, this proposal number 3, that motion could be considered, or the chair would entertain other motions. Okay. It's been moved by Commissioner Long, seconded by Commissioner Deckinga to table recommendation number 3. Discussion on that motion. All right. Seeing no discussion from the members, the commission will, or the chair will just offer a few quick comments, and that is, I definitely understand the legal implications of this and appreciate Mr. Harrison for bringing it forward. I will make one caveat comment in my drafting of this. I was not able to find any section of the charter where this fit. And so legally speaking, the only way that I saw that this could be inserted was a brand new subsection under Article 2. And the only legal concern I had with it in that case is the issue which is currently pending. And I'm not saying that they're identical, but the issue that's currently pending before the South Dakota Supreme Court on the question of whether a proposed amendment constitutes a revision or an amendment to a charter-type document like a constitution. And that is the issue in the lawsuit over Amendment A. And this, I think, at the very least, runs the risk of being outside the authority of the Charter Commission because it toes the line, at the very least, between being a wholesale addition of a new section and simply a revision or amendment. So for that reason, I just had some concerns on that, and I just wanted to voice that. It doesn't go to the substance, it's more to the legal technicalities and whether or not it could be, to your point, Mr. Arisman, on subsequent challenges, could be challenged later as inappropriate. That's the only thing I'll offer on that. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chair, I have a comment on the motion, because I just, when you look at the rules of procedure for city council meetings, which this one doesn't necessarily specifically apply, but it would tell you is that we discourage motions to table without a specific, indefinite tabling of motions is discouraged. Okay, so if it's being tabled, if that's a motion, if I heard it right, I would just ask that it be to a specific date. Now, obviously, we're counting down. We've only got absent adding another meeting, which may be a real need, at this point, we only have 2 more meetings. And so if the motion is to table, I would ask that be to a specific date, just for purposes of Mr. Harrisman and the public and, you know, where you would want it tabled to.
On that point, the chair would have a question. I don't know who's the appropriate person to answer this. I see Mr. Greco in the crowd. I don't want to put him on the spot. What is the deadline by which proposals must be submitted to amend the charter for them to go on the ballot?
Mr. Chair, it's February 11th, but for all intents and purposes, I think that meeting is February 8th, City Council meeting of February 8th.
The chair, similar to the procedures that they use in peer, would recommend that we, if there's going to be a proposal to table until it would not be able to be effective for the upcoming election, would recommend that we choose the date February 13, the day after it could possibly be submitted.
I would make a substitute motion.
Oh, that's,
No.
you gotta hit the button on your microphone, because I don't know that the public or the recording can catch what you're saying unless your mic's on. Okay.
There, it's on. Okay, says on, okay. I admit to being technologically challenged. So, anyway, I move, well, I think one of my colleagues has a substitute motion, but my motion was, or my proposed amendment to my motion was to table until the day after the deadline for making the ballot. So, and I think if I'd let him talk instead of rushing to offer my thoughts, Commissioner Long would have sounds like would have beaten me to it. So we will consider that motion amended. And now, Commissioner Hayek, did you have a substitute motion?
I do have a substitute motion, and I would motion that we reject this item as not appropriate for our charter. And I'll talk about that later, but this would be to reject it.
It's been moved by Commissioner Hayek, substitute motion that we instead reject recommendation number 3. Is there a second?
Have we canceled the first motion?
Only if there is a second. A substitute motion replaces the main motion, and then there's a whole procedural process we follow. If that's rejected by the body, then we'll be back to the original motion. So it would have to be seconded, and then the substitute motion will, for purposes of discussion at least, replace the original motion.
I would second the proposed amended, the substitute.
Okay.
Yes.
It's been substitute moved by Commissioner Hayek, seconded by Commissioner Deckinga to reject proposed recommendation number 3. Discussion on that motion.
If I may.
Commissioner Hayek.
And I thank you. I think these are very important items that are brought to us. However, I think there's a place for all of these, and state law does address them. I don't believe if we start trying to add into the city charter all of the things within state law that are impacted and dealt with in the city government, we're going to have a real, it won't even make sense. And so I think these are very good. And as the chairperson just said, where would we put them? We have to add, we start putting them together. I do believe, Scott, that they're very important items. And I think that once you make the public aware of these and they come and they know and they voice their opinions. Unfortunately, what I've seen when people voice opinions about affordable housing, they don't want them in their backyard. And there can be some real backlash on, and so as we try to, hit the affordable housing, I think that this is not appropriate for this particular venue. So, and that's why I make the motion to reject this.
Commissioner Zylstra.
Thank you. I may speak more on this in another issue, but One of the questions I ask myself is this subject appropriately a charter level issue? And my suggestion, my judgment is no, it's not. And so I will be voting in favor of this substitute motion.
Further discussion? Seeing none, we will turn to voting on this substitute motion to reject recommendation number 3. Pursuant to city ordinance as discussed at the first meeting, 32.2, at least 4 commission members must support a recommendation to place an amendment on the ballot. So this is not that motion, but I will, for purposes of public awareness and transparency, ask that this be a roll call vote of the members of the commission on this. So
Okay.
if you want to call a roll. So we will do roll call vote. All those in favor, please vote aye of the motion to reject. All those opposed, nay.
Commission members Deckinga,
Aye.
Hayek,
Aye.
Long,
Aye.
Smith,
Aye.
Zylstra.
Aye.
Motion passes. We will now turn to old business item 3C, formal recommendation number 4 from Scott Erisman. Mr. Erisman, would you like to come forward? And as you, just right off the bat, I'd ask you to please let us know if you disagree with the way in which this language was drafted for insertion into the charter as your proposal.
Let me look at it quick. The
Certainly.
4 is
The public input.
public input.
Yes, sir.
Let me go look and see what you wrote. I read it already, but
It's all right.
yeah, I agree with what was written. Yes.
All right, Mr. Erisman, you have the floor.
Of all 3 of these items, this is the most important to me. And I'll just keep it basic and tell you why. Right now, the city doesn't have a set rules when it comes to public input. They do follow state law. They have to allow it at their meetings. That's it. City council's different. Parks board's different. In fact, all the boards are different. The ethics board met the other day. They had an executive session, and then they had public input at the end. So the public couldn't watch the things because of the executive session. That's the example I'm trying to say, is you have a clear understanding that any meeting that the public meeting that the city holds, by state law, they have to have this public input. All I'm saying is add this, make it real simple, make it easy for the clerks and the other people who put the agenda together. They don't have to try to decide where they're going to slip it in. Just make it easy. You put it at the beginning of the meeting, you allow it 5 minutes. And I also believe that I'm giving a lot of leeway to the chair. The chair thinks there's too many people talking. The chair thinks somebody's going too long. The chair has a lot of things to say. But this way, the public knows that any meeting I go to, whether that's the zoning meeting, the Parks Board meeting, the planning meeting, any meeting I go to, I better get there at the beginning because that's when they're going to do public input. Right now, it's so willy-nilly, and there's a lot of meetings that are not getting posted, and there's some other meetings that are skipping the public input. And this way, it's in the charter. Everybody who puts the agendas together would know. Item D, put the public input at the beginning. You don't have anything to worry about. The chair will decide if the number of speakers and et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And I'm a big public input, First Amendment, transparent government, believe that the public should always come first. We fund this government. We are the #1 people to need to be taken care of. Business people who are getting licenses, TIFs, et cetera, they are here doing business. They are here to make money from what they're doing. Taxpayers are here to make our government better. We're funding the government. We're actually paying to come to these meetings. We should be first. I guess that's all I have on that.
Thank you, Mr. Harrisman. Before we get to questions, is there further public input on the public input proposal from Mr. Harrisman? Mr. Zeterik, welcome.
Mike Zidert. I just thought this is kind of interesting, though. I mean, it comes up a lot, and I got thinking, I don't know if the charter is the proper place to put public input, but I think it's an interesting discussion to have. I think, how do we define what public input is? Where do we have it? Where do we place it? I mean, currently we have public input. We once had it at the front part of the meeting, and now we have it at the back half of the meeting, but at the same time, as a city, we kind of define public input as having public input on first and second readings. And so, I mean, it's kind of torn on the issue of public input. I mean, I think it comes down to, for me, it'd be interesting, how do we define what public input is and where to have it within the meetings? Because I kind of like to have the public input on, it's kind of more refreshing to have input on the agenda items themselves, because then people can speak. They know they can speak throughout the meeting. I think that should be another part of the discussion as well. So, just my thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Zeterik. Apologize, I've mispronounced your name a couple times now. Further comments on this recommendation? Seeing none, I would I'd open it up to any questions from the commission of Mr. Harrisman or Mr. Zeterik? Seeing none, I would have a question for Mr. Harrisman.
I didn't see a correction, actually. I apologize. In between the word receive and public, I think the word general should be there. I don't want this to be, like Mike brought up, this doesn't have anything to do with agenda items. This is general public input, and I think that's the correct terminology, is what they call it. So in the first sentence, the council shall receive general public input.
All right. If it is you as the member of the public who has proposed this, unless there's an objection from any member of the commission, I will consider that for purposes of this to be a correction. And so your proposal would be the first sentence, the council shall receive general public input at every regular and special meeting before taking up any business items, period. And the rest of it will be as presented? Mm-hmm. Thank you. So my question to you, it sounds like you're saying that there is inconsistency among the various boards and commissions of the city. So are there, to your knowledge, any boards or commissions of the city of Sioux Falls that receive public input at the beginning of the meeting consistently?
Mm-hmm. Parks Board.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Trying to think, there's been a couple other ones. I don't go to all the meetings, and most of them are not televised. So, but Parks has consistently kept it at the beginning. Okay. Yep.
Do you know if in the last several years there have been any boards that have changed it up from meeting to meeting on when at the meeting they receive the public input, or do they at least each board seem to be consistent?
I think planning switched it. Used to be at the beginning, they put it to the end. And I think that changed after just state law changed that you have to require it. So I thought that was odd. Of course, the city council voted on it and moved it. It was a proposal by the mayor's office and moved it to the end, even though there was a year before, I believe, and a different council said, we're going to make these changes to 3 minutes, but we're going to let you, the compromise was to keep it at the beginning. And well, I guess that wasn't good enough, so they pushed it to the end. And I've noticed that people just aren't coming anymore like it used to be. And that was the intent of them moving it. I mean, we know that. We know that now. So, yes.
Are you aware, one of the parts of your proposal was that each speaker during the public input portion must be entitled to is entitled to at least 5 minutes. Are you aware of any boards or commissions of the city that are limiting each speaker to less than 5 minutes?
Well, the city council's 3.
Oh, I was unaware of
Yeah,
that. Thank you.
yeah. And I'm finding, if you're not well rehearsed or a good public speaker, it's hard to get in your item in 3 minutes. It just is. And sometimes 5 minutes. I know that the county commission, well, of course it isn't the city, but the Minnehaha County Commission does not have a time limit. But they will cut you off if they feel like you're going long. The previous mayor came to them, wanted some kind of, he's got a cabin out on a lake or something, and he wanted some kind of wastewater thing. He spoke for 9 minutes, and they didn't cut him off, which I thought was funny because he was always so against public input at our meetings, but he was able to go to their meeting and speak for 9 minutes. But they don't have a limit. I watched one meeting, this is a few years back, guy talked for 20 minutes until finally Cindy cut him off. 20 minutes. I mean, like I said, there's a lot, the way this is written, I believe, there's a lot of discretion with the chair. So if the chair believes, even if you're under your 5 minutes and you just are being repetitive or whatever, you can certainly say, you've said that already 5 times, sit down, so.
Okay. Further questions of the commission? Commissioner Hayek.
Well, just on your last statement, you said there is discretion with the chair, but it doesn't say there's discretion for the chair to make it shorter than 5 minutes. They get 5 minutes if they want to.
The chair can gavel.
Not the way this is written. They shall be entitled to speak for at least 5 minutes, with more time being permissible at the discretion of the chair. And so I heard you say just now that the chair could cut them off if they were, I just want to.
I guess I meant being disruptive. The chair can do that. And sometimes disruptive doesn't mean necessarily that you're yelling, doesn't necessarily mean that you're swearing. Disruptive can also mean constantly repeating yourself up here, saying stuff over and over. That can be disruptive.
But it does not say that.
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
But I think that's in Robert's rules. I think that's addressed elsewhere in the charter. I don't think you need to put it in here. I think that's part of Robert's rules. I think that the chair can gavel and stop a speaker. This is addressing putting the input at the beginning of the meeting for all meetings. That's what it's addressing.
Commissioner Zylstra? Oh, sorry. I saw you reaching for your microphone. Any further questions? Mr. Arisman, thank you very much. I will close public input on this and turn to commission discussion or action. Now, Commissioner Zylstra.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as I've said, and I'm not going to, keep at it, but I still like a positive motion, so I will make a positive motion that we move this item forward for the ballot.
It has been moved by Commissioner Zylstra that that the Charter Revision Commission recommend number 4 on public input. Is there a second? That motion dies for lack of a second. Is there any further action or discussion?
Well, I'm going to move that we reject this recommendation, number 4. Is that the appropriate language?
Yes, yes, sir.
All right.
It's been moved by Commissioner Long that we reject recommendation number 4. Is there a second?
Well, I would second that.
Okay, all right. Saved by the bell. It's been moved by Commissioner Long, seconded by Commissioner Deckinga, that we reject recommendation number 4. Discussion on that motion, Commissioner Long?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it might be a very good idea to have some consistency throughout the various groups. Having said that, it seems to me that if I was writing the rule, it would be that the public input should come after the agenda items so that members of the public who want to address the agenda items have the opportunity to do that, but prior to any action being taken by the board. Now, none of it says that. I share the concern of Commissioner Hayek that it doesn't say, I mean, as I read this, the only discretion that the chair has is to extend the 5 minutes. And it doesn't have other discretion. The chair doesn't have other discretion. But, I mean, and but the, and I draw simply on my experience in the legislature. The issue is presented, proponents speak, opponents speak, and then, but the issue is presented first, the bill is presented first, and then the public comment is appropriate. I'm not sure it's good public policy to simply have general discussion at the beginning of any meeting without any particular issue being presented. So for those reasons, I move rejection.
Thank you, Commissioner Long. Commissioner Zylstra.
To address Commissioner Long's concern, I think we addressed most of his concern when we clarified that we're speaking here about the general public input. This does not address public input for any agenda item. Any agenda item, as I understand it, is a completely separate issue, and that always occurs. There's a call for public input when any agenda item is before the bodies, as we're doing today. So I don't think, I think we've already addressed that that aspect of Commissioner Long's concern when we said we're talking about general public input, which is, as I understand it from my experience of living in different communities, is the opportunity for the citizens to speak on any topic that they want their elected officials to hear. And I think that's a longstanding tradition across our country and is in fact a tradition here as well. The problem is that, as Mr. Erisman perceives it, it's now at the end of the meetings rather than at the beginning of the meeting.
Commissioner Hayek.
Thank you. I think the idea of putting public input into the charter is a good idea. However, I would have suggested an amendment that I don't think you would have liked, because I would have said the council shall receive general public input at every regular and special meeting, period. And then I would delete everything until you get to, there shall be no limit on the number of speakers during public input except at the discretion of the chair. And then that particular body would determine when they were going to have that public input. So I think it's important specifying the time and where it's going to be placed in the meeting and the time limit. I think we start to get into issues that really shouldn't be addressed by this body. And I also will say, I know you have a concern, and I think it's a legitimate one, that these are the public, they want to come and speak. However, having sat behind the desk so many times, and I've watched children who are here for items to hear it, they're waiting and they're waiting, and you, I know, would agree with some of the public input. People decide to, they're running for some, I don't know what they're doing, but it's not fair to those people who have looked at the process. And the process says if you want to be placed on the agenda, at this meeting, you must do X, Y, Z, and they have done it. And they have sat here, and they have had to wait and wait. We've had hourly employees. You can say the expensive business people, but we've had hourly employees who are waiting, who are paying babysitters, trying to get home to their kids, and they sit and wait because of some lengthy. So I could say public input with that amendment, but putting it in as we have specified it, I can't support.
Further comments? Seeing none, I would just offer a few. First of all, I'm going to echo Commissioner Long. I do agree that consistency of the location of the public input during the meeting is something that's important. I think it's going to be unclear to some members of the public who want to come and offer that type of general public input where during the meeting they're going to be authorized to do that, because it sounds like it varies from different boards and commissions and city councils. I do, however, believe, and Mr. Arison, I think, would agree, and during his comments said so, that the chair needs some discretion on where and when some of these things are going to happen. The First Amendment is definitely sacrosanct. I think the First Amendment rights to freedom of speech, to public input, to presenting your petitions for grievances or whatnot, that's all guaranteed by the First Amendment. But I do think that the government has constitutionally been allowed to place reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions on where, when, and how that type of input can be presented. I think our state law does do a decent job, a good job of guaranteeing in statute that this public input be allowed at the meeting. I would definitely agree that there needs to be some kind of consistency in the way that this is allowed across the various boards and commissions at the city. But I would also say that I would share Commissioner Hayek's concerns about placing something like this into the charter. As a matter of law, the charter was designed to be, to set the framework for the laws and authority of the city government. And having this type of micromanagement, particularly of something that is largely ministerial in terms of the way the procedures happen for these various boards and commissions, I think that if the public would like to push the city council to adopt an ordinance, that would be the appropriate place for this to happen, an ordinance that would have that kind of consistency guaranteed. But I think putting this into charter, a document that is designed to put guardrails up for governmental authority, is not the way to do this. But again, I would share the concerns about consistency of time, place, and manner. Okay, so unless there's any further comments, we will turn to the vote on the motion, which is to reject formal recommendation number 4. All those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed, nay. And I will ask again for a roll call vote on this motion.
Commission members Deckinga?
Aye.
Hayek?
Aye.
Long?
Aye.
Smith?
Aye.
Zeistra?
Nay.
That motion carries. We will move to item 3C on our agenda, 3D, formal recommendation number 5. Mr. Arisman, we have presented some draft language for this proposal regarding Sioux Falls residency for department heads. I would just ask you at the beginning to let us know, having reviewed that, if you disagree with any of the language.
I would prefer the 30-day, but I do kind of agree with what Mr. Zeistra did, giving 6 months. Giving them 6 months. Is that what, I think that's what you were, instead of 30 days, 6 months, that's the difference. That you give them 6 months to find housing, I think that would be more fair than 30 days. So I wouldn't be, though I'd prefer 30 days, I wouldn't be opposed to 6 months, if you were all agreeable on that. I did read Mr. Bill O'Toole's letter. I totally disagree with him, and I'll tell you why. A few years ago, the city did a salary study, but they didn't do a study on the directors, which is interesting. They did it on the lower employees to see if they were paying appropriately. There was a lot of questions to Mr. O'Toole about why a study wasn't done on the directors, and there wasn't really a reason. So what I did was I went and I did my own and got the salary list of the city directors, and then I checked Lincoln, Omaha, Fargo, and Des Moines. And while we weren't always the number one payer for similar things, we were a lot higher than most of them on the things. And some of the places actually combine directors. So they'll combine a department and which we didn't do in some cases. The city pays 6 figures to directors. They give them incredible benefits. They can have a pension if they leave here. They are very well compensated. For Mr. O'Toole to say that this would harm them recruiting people, I just don't agree with that at all. It's false. Lincoln, Nebraska has double the population we have, I think. I think they're more than us. We pay almost always better than Lincoln. We beat Fargo a lot. We even beat Des Moines and Omaha in some things. And did you know we're the only city out of all those cities that have our own doctor, our own health director, which Dr. Tingley? None of them have that. So to say that a recruitment would be an issue if they had to live in Sioux Falls, which probably provides the most affordable housing out of any of the towns around us. I talked to a guy from Brandon who said people are leaving Brandon like crazy now because the property taxes are so high and they have so many issues with their water. And then lastly, as I had mentioned before, besides all that, disagreed with Mr. O'Toole, this is a common rule in governments. It's a very common rule. And the school district has it. The superintendent has to live in the city. They have a specific amount of time to do that. County commissioners have to live in the county that they serve. State legislators have to live in the district that they serve. This is not uncommon. This would not hurt recruitment for the city. And I think this is extremely long overdue. And my 2 biggest arguments for it is especially public safety. You know, the fire chief and the police chief should live in Sioux Falls. I think they both do now currently. But the last fire chief did not live in Sioux Falls. And the public works director, I think a lot of the directors have to deal with public safety, and if there's any kind of disaster, they need to be available. They can't be driving from Laverne or from Colton. They gotta be here. And that's my biggest concern. And my other concern is, as I mentioned, they get an amazing benefits package. They have an amazing 6-figure salary. They all make over 6 figures. They should be paying taxes in the town that they serve and the people who are paying them. They should be paying their taxes here. Not in T, not in Colton, not in Laverne, Minnesota. And I look at it as an economic thing too, and a matter of fairness. And I actually believe that the school district's argument was that, the tax thing. Property taxes, where you are paid, the superintendent is paid by property taxes to the school district, you should be paying property taxes in the school district that you're working for. And I don't think this is controversial. I don't think this is really restrictive. It's just basically saying, if you are the director of Department A for the city of Sioux Falls, you should probably live in the city of Sioux Falls. If you had any questions.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Harrisman. We'll come back to you for questions. We'll open it up. Is there other public input on formal recommendation number 5? Any other public input? All right. Are there questions from the commission of Mr. Harrisman? Seeing none. Oh, Commissioner Zylstra.
Mr. Harrisman, did I understand you to say you liked the placement and wording under 4.01B better than my suggestion that it be a new, that be added to 4.02A?
I prefer the 30, but I find the 6-month acceptable.
Okay,
but
apart from the 30, 60, or 6 months, do you see a difference between the wording I had proposed and the wording that our stat chair.
I like Justin's wording. I think Justin wrote that. I like his wording better.
Okay,
So maybe change the 30 days to 6 months?
Yeah,
If
okay.
that's, I mean, that's up to you guys.
thank you.
I would ask this, Mr. Erisman, for that purpose. You said a couple times it's your preference that it be 30 days. We want to make sure we honor your request as the citizen who's presenting this. So if you'd prefer 30 days, unless there's an objection, we'll go with 30 days if there's
How
no
about,
objection.
then I want to change that then.
Okay.
I did. Let's do 6 months.
6 months, all right.
I just feel that it would have a better chance of passing you guys and passing the voters if we went 6 months.
Okay, then we will change the sentence to be inserted into 4.01B to read, "To be eligible for appointment by the mayor under this section, a person shall reside within the city limits of Sioux Falls or shall establish such residency no later than 6 months after assuming office." Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Any questions of Mr. Erisman? Okay, seeing none, we will close public input on formal recommendation number 5. Open it up to comments or action from the commission.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Zylstra.
under comment, I would just withdraw any suggestions in the note that I sent to the committee, to the commission. In favor of the amended language that we've been discussing.
So looking at agenda packet, under formal recommendation number 4, Commissioner Zylstra is withdrawing his proposed language at page 3 of 4 for that item. So Mr. Erisman's proposal, formal recommendation number 5, shall be page 2 of 4, the language that I read. Further comments or action from the commission?
Mr. Chair?
Commissioner Hayek.
I'm having trouble with this one in that, I thought, oh, okay, that makes sense. And then I thought, the housing industry got so absolutely bizarre here. And I think it still is, based on people. And if you recruit somebody, buying a house, moving, getting all located is not cheap. And so if we recruit somebody, good person, wants to come here, wants to live, and can't find a house, but has to do this because we are going to get controlling of lives, and they then say, well, I have to find something, so maybe they've got 4 kids and they find something with 1 bedroom, whatever, and they want to get something bigger, but the expense of moving into that one house then they have to do to take their job. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to kind of, I'm not sure that we need to get micromanaging again. I think that makes sense. In our early married days, we lived in Minneapolis. And actually, I didn't live in Minneapolis proper. I lived in a suburb. But people kind of worked in and out of all the different, in Golden Valley, they had their own little municipal government, but people moved in and out. And I think Sioux Falls has become that kind of a metro area where we've got Harrisburg and T and Lenox and Del Rapids, and they're all together. And I don't know if you want to expand it, that they would live within our, what do they call it? I can't think of the name, the core area that, what do they call that area? The
Metropolitan
yeah,
area?
the metropolitan area. Now, if you wanted to do that, that makes sense. I'm having trouble with the application of this.
Further discussion or action, Commissioner Zylstra?
I think Commissioner Hayek raises a good question, but I have a question that I don't know the answer to. Does the city offer relocation expenses to new hires at any level?
I see you're looking at me.
Well, I don't know, you were a recent hire.
Well, I don't know if I fit that category quite, I don't know. I don't think so, to be honest with you, but don't take that as truth because I don't know.
And I raise that question, Mr. Chairman, because I have administered a policy similar to this. And we also did offer relocation cost reimbursement. So that always took some of the edge out of it. That's not to say there were not problems with people who are willing to commute quite a ways and for one reason or another don't want to live in your community. But I don't know the answer to that, but I do think it's feasible. And I'm not sure whether, if this were on the ballot, I would vote for it or against it, because I would like to hear, the city council and the mayor and so weigh in and try to convince the voters of it. But it seems to me it's appropriate for the charter in here, and it's not unusual for organizations and/or municipalities to have such regulations, and I think we could trust the voters to make a decision on it.
Further discussion or action from the commission?
I have a question which is close. Is the city prohibited from paying moving expenses?
You were looking at Justin, now you're looking at me.
I should probably be looking at Terry, who probably.
Well, and again, we have, one of my assistant attorneys is in the HR department, maybe he could tell you. I don't know, I'm not aware, I've been through the charter and city ordinance in various categories for several years now. I don't recall seeing anything in policy or law that would prohibit paying relocation expenses. Nothing leaps to mind, unresearched opinion, but I don't think the city's prohibited.
We've still got a decent amount of business to go through, so I'll ask again, further discussion or action from the commission on formal recommendation number 5?
Is there a motion on the floor?
No.
I will move that this be approved.
Okay. It has been moved by Commissioner Long to approve recommendation number 5 for placement on the 2022 municipal ballot. Is there a second?
Supported.
Seconded by Commissioner Zylstra. Discussion on that motion.
I hope the city is not in a position where they are prohibited from making offers that would include travel or relocation expenses. But a reasonable residency requirement does not strike me as a bad thing. So I'll support this.
Mr. Chair.
Further discussion, Commissioner Hayek.
How many, is this an issue? Are there a lot living outside? And I think we have you out, so I'll just take your nod of your head. And I'm struggling with this because if someone is living in Harrisburg and they are going to Sioux Falls, I mean, they're practically in Sioux Falls. And, the housing situation, let's say they need to have handicapped housing for their child, and the only place they can do it is outside the city limits. I think sometimes we go too far, do we really want all that government control? over this. And it's not like somebody's living in Watertown and working in Sioux Falls. You can't. Well, maybe they can, but it'd be quite a commute. I don't understand the problem. And that's why, I don't know if we need to correct something that isn't wrong. And so, we've got, if somebody works here and they're a really good worker and they've lived in Del Rapids and their wife is a teacher in the schools there and their kids have been there and they got the job here, why would we say, oh, you have to move here? I know there's a tax base, but I really think we're putting a heavy hand of government, and I'm having a hard time with it. I really am. Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, the chair would offer a couple of remarks on this. I think this type of requirement is certainly one that could absolutely make sense for the city of Sioux Falls. However, I think that this is, by and large, another example of a micromanagement, in this case of a personnel issue that would be inserted into our charter to designate required residency. In addition, I think that the Sioux Falls metropolitan area has become monumentally more fluid than it ever has been. So I think from a policy standpoint, I would echo Commissioner Hayek's comments that the adage in peer or in other legislative bodies is this appears to be a solution in search of a problem. I think if there were examples of malfeasance or lack of attention to duty, dereliction of office, any of those kinds of things that stemmed from people living outside of the city limits of Sioux Falls and being directors of departments, then that might be something that would really raise eyebrows among this commission, or more importantly, among the city council. I think the fact that this has, to my knowledge, not been considered, or at the very least passed by the city council, is an important point. I don't want to misrepresent Mr. Erisman's presentation, but I think the main argument in terms of a problem that needs to be addressed here from Mr. Erisman was the lack of a tax base. The people inside the Sioux Falls city limits, when they are in city limits, pay municipal sales tax. There are ways, if you are renting or otherwise, to get around payment of property taxes anyway. We don't have income taxes in South Dakota. So that makes this a tricky consideration. And I understand that the residents, that the voters in Sioux Falls would be the ones to weigh those kinds of things, but I think that all of the manifold issues that are going to come down with this on both sides are something that should require us to proceed with caution when making the decision of whether we should advise that this be placed on the ballot. So again, with the micromanagement being the main issue and the charter being a guideline document instead of a lawmaking document, I would ask that the commission oppose the motion and then go on to reject this recommendation. I think it's an item that can be explored by the City Council, or if in future Charter Revision Commission sessions, additional arguments and policy reasons to put this into the charter can be brought forward, I would consider it at that time. We will move on to the vote on this. All those in favor of the motion to approve and place this on the 2022 municipal ballot, please vote aye. Those opposed, nay, and we will call the roll.
Commission members Deckinga,
Nay.
Hayek,
Nay.
Long,
Aye.
Smith,
Nay.
Zylstra.
Aye.
That motion fails. We are now at the point of needing either another type of motion to take a definitive action on this because it has not been approved, but it has not yet been rejected or tabled, deferred, or something else.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Zylstra?
I would move that this item be removed from the list of pending considerations for the commission.
As a procedural matter, my only concern there is we have had a legitimate proposal from a citizen of Sioux Falls He has asked that this be placed on the formal list of recommendations, and in my opinion, as the chair, the citizen is the only one who would have the authority to withdraw. We cannot remove because the position of this body has been, if a citizen comes forward and presents it to us, we have the obligation to act upon that. And I believe the ordinances require us to take definitive action. I'll allow additional discussion of that from anybody else in the commission. Okay, seeing none. Commissioner Zylstra, do you want to move forward with your motion, withdraw? I don't want to steamroll over you.
Well, I didn't hear a second, so I think it's dead.
Okay. No second. Is there any second on Commissioner Zylstra's motion? Okay. It fails for lack of a second. The chair will entertain other motions.
I will move that we reject this item.
It's been moved by Commissioner Hayek that we reject formal recommendation number 5. Is there a second?
I would second.
Seconded by Commissioner Deckinga. Any discussion on the motion?
Move the question.
Okay. We will move to a roll call vote on that motion. All those in favor, please vote aye. Those opposed, nay.
Commissionmember Deckinga?
Aye.
Hayek?
Aye.
Long?
Nay.
Smith?
Aye.
Zylstra?
Nay.
That motion carries. Formal recommendation number 5 will be rejected. We are on to agenda item 3E, the list of formal recommendations. Even though it is under item 4D1, I will note for the record, and it is part of the commission's agenda packet, that citizen Joe Kirby has made a proposal to change Charter Sections 2.02, 2.11, and 2.03, which will be renumbered to 3.05. This item is available for public review and comment at the next meeting. Unless there is an objection, the chair would like to put Mr. Kirby's recommendations and Mr. Zoterek's recommendations on the agenda for our meeting on December 8, 2021.
I also move.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor, please vote aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Zoterek and Mr. Kirby, if you are listening, we will consider your recommendations at our meeting on December 8. Moving on to new business item 4A. We turn to the various sections or articles of the charter that will be under consideration here so that we, as the members of the commission, can discuss, ask questions, or make proposals or amendments to any of those sections. We typically go section by section out of deference to our city employees unless there is an objection. I am going to call the article and ask that any members of the commission who have a comment, question, or proposal for amendment to any of the subsections under that article to please inform the chair. Article 7, General Provisions. Commissioner Zylstra.
Under 7.01B, Board of Ethics, this seems fairly vague. I reviewed some of the minutes of the Board of Ethics of the past year. I believe the minutes are very vague, partly because of the confidentiality, but partly because there appeared to be some conflict between the Board of Ethics and the City Council on who had authority for what. I don't have a proposal because I don't know enough about it, but I think somebody ought to, somewhere along the line, bring a proposal to this body to improve the clarity of 7.01B. That's just a comment. Thank you.
Chair, I did have, unless you want to address that, I do have a comment also.
Go ahead, Commissioner Decker.
7.01A, I know in other boards, and other areas of government, acceptance of gifts and other things of value, there's actually a value amount. And we don't have a value amount in this one, and I don't know if we would like to address that.
I would ask two questions of the city attorney's office, following up on Commissioner Zylstra and Commissioner Deckinga's questions. I know that for the Charter Revision Commission, which is created by the charter, there are specific ordinances further fleshing out the scope of authority and everything else. Are there similar ordinances with reference to the Board of Ethics?
Are there,
Ordinances that further flesh out the scope of authority, procedural matters, et cetera, for the Board of Ethics?
yes, if you look at chapter 35, I was wondering if your specific question related to hers as far as amounts. What I would tell you is chapter 35 creates the Board of Ethics per the charter, and it lays out all the qualifications to terms, to appointment, to chair, to meetings. And then you have two primary sections. You have the conflicts of interest for officers and employees, and then you have another section for conflicts for city council members. And there are procedural components to that. Some are similar, some are different. And then there's a final ordinance that relates to the penalty. So, and just, if I may, to address kind of the question on the amounts, you know, again, you have a lot of parallel ordinances for officers and council members. There's some similarities, some differences, both of which primarily state that do not state a specific amount, and then there are a number of opinions, advisory opinions, provided by the Ethics Board as interpreting that. But the Ethics Board has consistently stated that they're not going to set a number. And so, you know, to use the language, it's that employees and council members may accept unsolicited gifts of nominal intrinsic value. And so it's one of those, when you're in the realm of ethics versus specifics, you know, at some point the council has not amended that to a specific number. They can, but as of now, a specific number does not exist. I don't know if that answers your question. It's kind of a...
It does.
Okay.
Commissioner Hayek?
Yes. For some reason, I'm coming back to state law. I think does give a guideline. Is that right, Larry? Do you recall? Is it state law? Is it like $50 or something? And it was my understanding.
Primarily in elections.
Yeah. No, but I mean, as a
If
gift
you give
to.
away pencils, is that a
Yeah,
problem?
they can give pencils, and but I think, for some reason, I thought that the city council was kind of wrapped into that, also the same under state law in terms of what kind of, but I may be mistaken on that. I thought there was, though, the $50 number comes to mind, but I may be.
Well, there's,
I'll look into it.
sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
The state law, you know, there are ethics requirements and rules and regulations at the state level. Their applicability here, unresearched, I don't know if that's the case. You know, our ordinances have controlled, and you know, we are one of the few municipalities in the state that has an ethics board. So, you know, for what that's worth.
Well, may I?
Commissioner Long, please.
Well, I noted in 701, there is the final sentence of that section that says municipal officials shall be at a minimum restricted from conflict of interest to the same extent that state public officials are bound by state law. So it may be incorporated.
That's kind of what
Yeah.
my understanding.
I think there are some issues with that language because you have rules of conflict at the state level that vary pretty significantly depending upon which state official you're dealing with or who's being held to account. But, and so that, I mean, applying the state law standard in this forum might present its own difficulties, but generally, the issue you're talking about might be incorporated because it's in state law.
That was my understanding.
Commissioners Zylstra and Deckinga, in light of the responses that are in the discussion, do you have specific proposals for amendment to Article 7? Any further comments, questions, or proposals for Article 7? Article 8, Charter Amendment. Comments, questions, or proposals for amendment? Article 9, Transition Separability Provision. Commissioner Zylstra.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and again, this is going to be a comment, not a proposal. Section 9, or Article 9, pardon me, is intended, and I did go back and look at the model charter that they were following when they created this. You need something to go from the present to get the new charter operating, and that's what Section 9 is. And pretty much all of these provisions dropped away, except for one, and that's 9.05F, salary of mayor and council members. And that goes on forever unless the charter is changed, and it was changed once to change the compensation of the council members. The mayor's has never been changed, except for the inflation factor that's in there. Now, that was not the model. The model suggested language would be to set the initial salary until changed by the city council later on. Well, anyway, I've brought this up several times, but I've also said I will not bring it up forward in a year when a mayor is running for re-election. I am just notifying this group that 2 years from now, if I am reappointed by the mayor and confirmed by the council, I will be bringing a proposal to change 9.05F. And if I am not reappointed or confirmed by the council, I will sit where Mr. Zeterich and Mr. Erisman is and bring a citizen's proposal. Just for those of you who will be here, just to let you know, that's what I'm thinking.
And the chair will respond to that by saying in 2 years, Commissioner Zylstra, all of that will be someone else's problem because I will not be on the commission. No, not problem, someone else's consideration. So appreciate that. I will offer a comment on that and say in the 5 years, 6 years that I have been on this body, this section 9.05F has been brought up, I think, every time. It is one that, and I would agree with Commissioner Zylstra, it probably may have been intended to drop away along with the rest of Article 9. It is something that Article 9 may need to be considered for repeal or otherwise, but it is a much broader discussion, as we have found out. This is probably the first time in my tenure that we have not had that section brought up for possible amendment. Further comments, questions, proposals, Article 9? Seeing none, I believe that brings us to the end of new business, since we have already dealt, unless there's somebody who would like to speak specifically to Mr. Kirby's proposals, which will come up at the next meeting. We will turn to public input.
Scott Erisman, Sioux Falls. I just wanted to say, Mr. Zylstra, there's an old term, follow the money. And I think our ethics board and the way it operates right now is very bad, and it needs to be overhauled. Councilor Brecky has suggested several times to them and to the city council that there needs to be ethics training for all city employees, and they keep blowing her off, and they don't want to do nothing about it. I believe that we have a serious ethics issue in this city, but it goes across the country. Comment a little bit on what happened earlier, and I do appreciate the commissioners that did vote to put mine, it surprised me, I had no doubt that they were going to be rejected, all three of them. I knew that before I even proposed them. I'm not going to go into a long rant about it, but you know my feelings on the Charter Revision Commission. That's where things go to die. And I just wanted to correct some of your guys' arguments, whether you agree with me or not. So for public input, they're already following state law. They're already doing public input at all the meetings, general public input. They're already following state law. My change was an extra to put it at the beginning and to do it across the board. I didn't think it was anything that was that controversial, but apparently the public getting their time to talk here is a controversial thing. I mean, the city council had a tie vote on it when they moved it back to the end of the meeting. It was a tie vote, and the mayor had to break the vote. So 4 city councilors believed that it should have stayed at the beginning. So, just so you know, that's why I thought it was a good thing for the public to vote on. As for TIFs, it's complicated, I get it. That one I never aspired that it would go anywhere. There are some things in the legislation that need to change, but I firmly believe they're being extremely abused in this town. Extremely, extremely, extremely abused. And there still has never been an economic study showing us our TIFs working in Sioux Falls. There's never been one. No university's done one. No, nobody's done any. It's just the assumption that they work. But when you read other studies in other states, they don't work. As for the employee thing, I still struggle with people who make 6 figures a year and work for the public can't pay taxes within the city that they work for. Really struggle with that. I think it's a moral and ethical obligation, to tell you the truth. I think that you have a moral obligation. I like the idea that we should pay for relocation. Don't have a problem with that if they're a good candidate. But let's take the school district, for instance. Mrs. Stavum moved from Lincoln to Seattle and moved all the way to Sioux Falls to take up the job. She didn't seem to struggle with that. And I don't think anyone else would struggle with living in our city and paying taxes here. And as for renting an apartment, you are paying property taxes through your rent. So apartment, buy a house, either way, you're still paying property taxes. But I want to talk about something, the most important thing besides this process. I think you guys are very professional, even though I knew they were going to get killed. I thought you were very professional. I didn't appreciate the meeting being at 3:30, and it goes back to my thing about public input being at the beginning of the meetings. Well, if you noticed, there's nobody here. I know why? Because we had a meeting at 3:30. Because we were concerned that the city employees weren't going to be able to leave at a certain time. Public meetings are about that word, the public. I had to take PTO to come here. I don't think that's fair. These meetings should be at 5:30 or later. I don't believe we should be having public meetings at 3:30 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. Fortunately, I got free parking out here, but other than that, I didn't get a lot else. We have moved in this city, and one of the reasons the public input part, we've moved into this city where we're making it very, very difficult for the public to interact with our officials. And we are separating them. And we are saying the city is about the city and its employees and its leaders and its administrators, and it's no longer about the public. The people who fund the government, us. If we weren't here, you wouldn't be here. The city employees wouldn't have jobs. Thank you. Reconsider that.
Thank you, Mr. Harrisman. Further public input? Seeing none. I believe that brings us to the end. Oh, open discussion. Any further discussion from the members of the commission? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Second. Been moved by Commissioner Long, seconded by Commissioner Hayek to adjourn. All those in favor, please vote aye. Aye. We are adjourned.